region. Let's speak to Jamil Jaffer, who is a founder and the executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Jamil, thank you for being with us tonight. We're getting a bit of a sense of where precisely these strikes are being targeted. The Iranian news agency, the Fars news agency, talking in particular about a port city just south, the Bandar Abbas port, just south of the Strait of Hormuz. And we're talking here about self-defense strikes. That's the language that US Central Command has used. How significant is that sort of language?
No, that's exactly right, Darryl. The idea of self-defense is that if you're attacked or you're being threatened to be attacked, you can respond in kind and try to defeat the threat against you. And the concept here is that, in theory, we're in a ceasefire, but if the U.S. is attacked, as we ostensibly were yesterday by an Iranian attack drone that took down an Apache helicopter, then we're going to respond. And Bandar Abbas, you may remember Bandar Abbas not just from yesterday's strikes, but from the 1980s. That was the exact same port city where the Iranians would launch those gunboats that were patrolling the Straits of Hormuz when President Reagan broke the blockade of the strait by escorting ships through the strait.
Okay, so you've described nicely there how these things go, right? Which is that there is an attack on the US in the form of a Apache helicopter being shot down. Last night on the show, we were talking about some of the retaliatory strikes that the US had undertook. We're talking tonight about more strikes. So is that not an escalation at this point rather than self-defense?
Well, it's a great question. The question is whether the elements in Bandar Abbas, the missiles, the drone launchers they have there, are still threatening American forces. Are they lighting them up with their radars? Are there claims that they're going to be launched? Right? Are they hearing radio chatter? It could very well be that what the U.S. is hearing is, the Iranians preparing for another strike. In which case, you don't have to wait for the strike to be launched in order to engage in self-defense. All that being said, the fact of the matter also is that if the U.S. wants to stop these strikes from happening, which have happened sporadically over the last month and a half, we've been in the ceasefire, the U.S. is going to have to hit Iran harder to demonstrate to them that they're going to pay a price for doing these things. That may be what's going on here.
But I mean, is there not an argument that the president has sort of already given the game away on that? He told press gathered in the Oval Office earlier that these strikes were about frustration at a lack of progress in negotiations.
Well, Darryl, that is the challenge here. The president has made clear he wants an end to the conflict. He wants to get to a deal. The problem is the Iranians don't want to give him the deal he wants. And I think rightly he's sticking to his guns and saying, I'm not going to do any deal. The Iranians assess that he doesn't mean that. They assess that he really wants the conflict over. They assess that by keeping the strait closed and oil prices high, that he will ultimately cave in. And we'll see what happens. They may be right in that, but in fact, the president is trying to show that they're wrong and that he will hit them back. And it may require him to hit them significantly harder to really get them to the table to do a real negotiation. Remember, Darryl, the important thing here is we've been in a ceasefire for months, or maybe almost a month plus. They have never done their part. The Iranians have never done their part. They haven't opened the strait, not for one day, even though the U.S. has largely stopped hitting sites in Iran.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm keen to understand this in the sort of legal context as well, Jamil. Not least because of the potential pressure on America, on Donald Trump from Congress in America, who are watching this very, very closely, and may pull together an argument that says that the retaliatory strikes on the Apache helicopter happened already. Whether the threat is immediate or not, Donald Trump has said in the White House that he is frustrated with the progress of talks and therefore strikes will resume. Does that not meet the threshold for an escalation rather than being described as self-defense? Basically, whether the deal or don't, could that argument be formed by somebody somewhere in Congress who wants to hold Donald Trump in front of them?
Yeah, there's no doubt that argument could be formed. And in fact, the House has voted to end the war by a majority to end the war in Iran. The problem, of course, is that you require both the House and the Senate to act, and they have to act by a veto-proof majority, which nobody has in either House of Congress. And so they will not be able to effectively limit the president if he chooses to continue the conflict. And that's the real challenge for Congress if they are opposed to the conflict.
Let's just put ourselves in Iran's shoes for a moment then. They are obviously now receiving these strikes. They said that they would not be cowed by aggression and wouldn't be cowed by aggression during negotiations. They've always said, too, that they would sort of hit back if they felt they needed to, if they faced more aggression. They've been quite aggressive in their language, haven't they? Penny for their thoughts tonight on what their next move may be.
Well, this is the million or maybe multi-billion-dollar question on the table: is who's going to cave first? Will the Iranians give on enriched uranium and on having a domestic nuclear program? Will the president give on ending the conflict without getting that piece in it? That is the million-dollar question. And the question is, who's hurt more by the blockade on Iran's ports, or is Iran hurt more by that, or is the U.S. hurt more by the world price of oil and the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz? Right now, it looks, 50-50, but the Iranians, I think, assess the president will collapse first. I think that's a tough bet with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think so too. This operation was a joint venture between Israel and the US. That's how we understood it, how it was sort of delivered in the first instance. Israel have obviously resources and attention in Lebanon and other fronts. How active are Israel in this particular theatre now?
Well, we did just see Israel hit targets in Iran in response to Iran hitting targets in Israel. So the way this has gone, at least in the last few months, putting aside the actual conflict that took place, once we got to a ceasefire or something of a ceasefire there, we saw Hezbollah starting to launch rockets from the south of Lebanon to the north of Israel. Israel then responded in kind. Iran just this week says an attack on Hezbollah is an attack on us, essentially admitting what long thing we've always known, which is Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. And Israel says, you hit us for hitting Hezbollah, we're going to hit you back. And they just did that back and forth in the last couple of days. We'll see if this continues, but as of right now, it appears to have stopped.
And I suppose just sort of more to the point is that the last couple of days, weeks, I've been talking on Times Radio about the US and Iran trading strikes and Iran and Israel trading strikes. We haven't talked about US-Israel joint operation in the way that we did at the start of the conflict. I'm wondering if there is a sort of divergence. If there is, I mean, clearly they are allied talking to each other, but I'm wondering how much of a splintering there is at this point.
Well, what we saw in the last few days was President Trump publicly saying to the world that he had told Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, to stand down and to not respond, and Bibi responded anyways. He ignored the president's request, and then the president went out publicly and called on both Iran and Israel to stop striking one another, and both appear, having gone back and forth once or twice, to have done that. So the president ultimately got what he wanted, but not out of Bibi the first time. Bibi said, "Look, if Hezbollah is going to attack us and we're going to hit them, and Iran then strikes us, they're going to get it right in the teeth." And that's the kind of thing that's how you generate deterrence, right? What Netanyahu is doing. You may not like it, you may not like him, but he's generating deterrence in a way that President Trump probably should look at it and say, how do I generate that same kind of deterrence with Iran right now? It probably involves, to your point, Darryl, an escalation.
Yeah, okay.
Temporarily.
Yeah, okay. Good to talk, Jamil. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it. Jamil Jaffer, who is a founder and executive director at the National Security Institute in George Mason University. Jamil knows this situation inside out. He was part of the team that pulled together the original Iran nuclear deal. Always good to get his insights. Let's turn our attention.